So I just wanted to start off with you introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm Siena. I'm a 18-year-old neurodiversity advocate. I have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. When I was 13, I decided that I wanted to create a website called QL Mentoring to support kids that had learning differences and help them with tips and tricks at school to handle bullying and just general day-to-day problems that they might encounter. I was motivated to start my website, QL Mentoring, because when I was diagnosed with my learning differences, I found a real shortage of information, a shortage of websites and resources. And so I wanted to create my own resources that could be available to kids and to tailor them to the problems that kids have, not the problems that parents have or teachers have.
Yeah.
So I started QL Mentoring, and then some time passed, and it was 2018 when I decided that I wanted to start Neurodiversity Celebration Week as well. What was happening was I was getting a lot of kids who would reach out to me and say, you know, the world is such a discriminatory place, and no matter how I implement these tips and tricks into my life, I'm always going to get bullied because people just judge me for who I am, and they have all these misconceptions about the differences that I have, and so they decide to treat me poorly because of them. And there's not much I can do about that, and I really want to live in a world where there's less stigma. And I'd experienced that as well. You know, I'd had my QL Mentoring website, and I'd dedicated time to, figuring out how to make my life easier with these learning differences and how to really reap the benefits of them. And even then, still being empowered and happy about my learning differences, I was getting bullied for them. And it was because of all these misconceptions that people have. And so I wanted to start Neurodiversity Celebration Week with three main aims in mind. To educate teachers so that teachers can diagnose pupils and teachers can be more supportive to children in their class with learning differences. To educate peers so there are not as many misunderstandings and stereotypes, and they're less likely to bully and more likely to be more supportive to neurodivergent pupils. And then the last object was to empower neurodiverse people so that instead of focusing on all the negatives that might come with learning difference, they're focusing on the positives. And so Neurodiversity Celebration Week has currently 720 schools subscribed, and that's more than 500,000 students taking part.
Wow.
And people take part in all sorts of different ways. Some schools will go onto my website and they'll take an assembly plan that I've come up with, and they'll do a few assemblies. Other schools go onto my website and they'll find activities that I've set up, and assembly plans and lesson plans and posters that I've designed, and they'll put the posters all up over the school, and they'll do activities, and they'll dedicate the whole day to celebrating neurodiversity. And so I've had a lot of positive feedback from it. Mm-hmm. And I'm really proud to have started this event, and I'm really proud that people are really benefiting from it, and it's changing lives.
Yeah, that's incredible, and at such a young age. I mean, I can't imagine starting anything, literally anything at 13, just because I don't know what I was doing with my life then. But you mentioned having dyslexia and dyspraxia. And what do you think, because I feel like a lot of people don't really understand what it means to have them. And there are quite a few misconceptions that people have about it. And I was wondering if you could just clarify what it means for you having
dyslexia and dyspraxia. Yeah, so when I was younger, I had, or I have now, what I would describe as stealth dyslexia. So I had a type of dyslexia where I could read, and I could read perfectly fine. I actually had an advanced reading age. Mm-hmm. But I had really bad spelling. Like, my spelling was pretty bad. It was pretty horrendous, and it was the kind of thing where I was reading books that for adults. I mean, I was reading pretty advanced stuff. I was reading, newspaper articles at a young age. And even though I had this advanced vocabulary and I was interested in all these more advanced topics, I was still misspelling which. Like, if I were to write the sentence, which one is which, I would spell it like the witch with the pointy hat.
Right.
And not the way it's meant to be spelled. And teachers would look at it and they were like, I don't understand this. She's got an advanced vocabulary, she's reading, and she's misspelling this all the time. And there, and there, the three theres, I was always confusing them. I came up with new ways to spell there. I don't quite know how I managed that, but anything I could misspell, I would misspell. And teachers couldn't understand it because my parents would come in and they would say, I think Siena's dyslexic because this just doesn't make sense. And the teachers would say, there's no way because she can read. And if she were dyslexic, she wouldn't be able to read. And she would not be able to read as well as she's reading now. And so to come up with a reason why I was spelling this way, they would tell my parents she's lazy. So, she has an interest in doing all this other stuff, but she doesn't have an interest in spelling. And so she doesn't pay attention and she's careless. She doesn't try hard enough. And that's why she has bad spelling. And that was really hurtful for me because I actually wasn't lazy. I spent a lot of time focusing on my spelling. I spent a lot of time, studying for spelling tests. And when I would write my essays, I was very conscious of my spelling. I would think of a word that I wanted to include and not because I didn't know how to spell it and I didn't want to get penalized for that. And I came up with all these ways. I frequently misspell because, and so I came up with this thing, big elephants can always understand smaller elephants. And the first letter of each word is spelled because. And so every time I had to spell because, I would still have to think about that. And to this day, I do. And I would put a lot of effort into my spelling. And so to have teachers tell me, you're lazy, you're careless. Some teachers told me I was stupid because I wasn't able to spell correctly. It was really, really, really hurtful. And even though my parents flagged that I might be dyslexic very early on, it took me quite some time to get diagnosed after that because of misconceptions that teachers had. And so that was my dyslexia experience. With my dyspraxia experience, dyspraxia, for those who don't know, is a motor coordination disorder. And so it makes you rather clumsy, and it can also make you kind of a bit disorganized, and it can have an effect on your working memory. And so when I was younger, I was always the tallest kid in the class. And so teachers would think that because of that, I would be good at sport. And I remember when they would come up with netball teams, I was always in the top netball team because they would say, oh, you're going to be so good at blocking the ball because you're so tall. And I was atrocious. I was so terrible because I was dyspraxic. I had a motor coordination disorder. I had, a medical reason why I was really clumsy. And I couldn't catch the ball. I would trip over my feet when I was running and I'd fall. It was a complete disaster. And things happened so quickly when people are running around and getting the ball that I would get overwhelmed because I had a bit of a slower processing speed. So it took me a bit longer to kind of, the way I would explain it is I know what's happening, but it just takes me a bit longer to react to it. And so the ball would fly by me. And by the time I've realized, oh, there's a ball coming, I've put my hands up by the time it's hit the ground. And so I was terrible. And teachers would tell me that I was doing it on purpose because that was the only reason that they could explain it. They would say, there's someone literally half your height who's doing a much better job than you are. You should be doing really well at this because look at how long your legs are. You should be able to just walk over there faster than these people can run. And they would come up with these narratives to explain why I wasn't good at sport. And a lot of it was the same, you're lazy, you're careless. One time a teacher publicly told me in front of the whole sport team, you ruined that match on purpose. because you're an attention seeker and you think it's fun to ruin school matches and embarrass the school. I'm like, no, who wants that kind of attention? Like, I know, like, they're attention seekers, but you normally don't seek such negative attention.
Yeah, makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense, and I still don't understand how teachers reach that conclusion, because just from looking at it, like, I wasn't, like, nobody found that fun. Nobody found it cool. I would get bullied for it, and teachers would know I would get bullied for it. It was awful, but I wasn't diagnosed with dyspraxia, because dyspraxia, I consider it, lesser known. There's a lot of media attention to dyslexia. A lot of people have dyslexia. It's very common. ADHD as well, but dyspraxia, not as many people know about it. My mom had actually never heard of the condition before it was brought up, so I wasn't diagnosed till a lot later.
Right. And with ADHD, I've heard that the symptoms tend to differ between not just adults and children, but between male and female children. And so a lot of the time where a boy would exhibit, the more hyperactive and distracted kind of symptoms, the girl wouldn't. And so it'd be harder to diagnose in that sense. Is this the reality? And how does your ADHD, I guess, what symptoms do you exhibit?
Yeah, so you have ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then you have ADD, which is an attention deficit disorder. So with me, I have, I say I have ADHD because that's the bracket term, but ADHD or ADD. I don't have hyperactivity. And so when I was growing up, the way I exhibited my ADHD was through just zoning out. Like, if I was in a situation where I wasn't being stimulated enough and I just got a bit bored, I'd daydream. And teachers would tell me, you're always staring out the window, daydreaming, and that's what I would do. I wouldn't be loud or move around a lot or have a lot of energy. And so it was harder for teachers to realize that there was something off, because I got very good very early on at hiding it.
Yep.
And so I would zone out, but I would make sure that I zoned in just in time to get enough information that I needed. And in class, I would sit next to people who I could then say, okay, what are we doing now? What did she say?
Yeah.
And I came up with all these coping strategies. I remember at one point, my ADHD, I use it as kind of a coping mechanism. So when I get bored, I zone out, but also when I get stressed, I zone out. Because when I get stressed, I find it a lot harder to focus on what's going on around me, and a lot easier to just stay in my own head. And so I was in a school environment where I just was so stressed that I couldn't pay attention during school. And I didn't know I had ADHD. At the time, I thought it was my autism that was meaning that I was having this block. And so I would come home from school and I would teach myself the school curriculum. So I would go to school for 8 hours, and then I would come home and I would study for 6 hours. And in those 6 hours, I would make up everything that I was meant to be taught at school that I wasn't paying attention for. And so my teachers didn't think anything was wrong, because I was doing well on all the exams. I knew what was, they think that, in my tests, I knew what was happening. I would also read ahead in the textbook. And so sometimes if they would call on me, I would have the correct answer, even though I knew nothing about what was going on. And so teachers had no idea that I had this inattentive ADD. And eventually it got to a point where I was 15 and I felt like there was just something off. I'd taken 4 GCSEs previously, and those were the GCSEs that I was really interested in. And so I was able to hyper-focus, which is a part of ADHD. You have inattentive moments, and then there are times where you can really focus on something. And so because I love those GCSEs, those were math and physics and the sciences, I was able to just do them and not have all this distraction. But the second it came to, oh, you're going to have to do English and history and classics and all these exams that I didn't love as much. I couldn't hyperfocus, and so I was sitting there sometimes for 6 hours on the weekends trying to memorize a page of text and just constantly zoning out, and as hard as I tried it, nothing would work. And I thought it was my autism because I thought that it was, oh, well, I have a special interest in math, and if it's not math, I struggle to pay attention.
Mhm.
But then it just became more and more clear that there was something else there, and so I got diagnosed with ADHD. And after I got diagnosed, I had some crazy comments. I remember I told a teacher, oh, I have ADHD, I have this diagnosis, and so these are some adjustments that would be great if you could make in class to help me with my ADHD. And my teacher told me, oh, there's no such thing as ADHD. What ADHD is parents who don't know how to raise their children properly, and so their children are just really active and really badly behaved, and their children are embarrassment. And the parents are so embarrassed by their children that they think, oh, this is a bad reflection on me. I need to come up with a reason why they're like this. This can't be my fault. And so they came up with ADHD as a way to explain why why the children were badly behaved. And it was really hurtful to hear this because that's unfair to people who have hyperactive ADHD, but it's also unfair to someone like me where I always am like on my best behavior. And so to then all of a sudden be like, oh, the reason why you have this diagnosis is because your mom didn't know how to take care of you is really, really crazy. And for someone to say that when they know nothing about, my life, and obviously they're not very educated in what ADHD is, because if they'd sat and read a book about ADHD, so hearing people say that, it was hurtful, and hearing people make assumptions about me because they think, oh, you're going to be really. People seem to think that ADHD and badly behaved are like synonyms, when really they're not. If you can manage ADHD and if you can find ways to, make sure that people are occupied and make sure that they're not doing tasks that they struggle with, you can completely manage it and you don't have that effect. And so it's just really hurtful, all these misconceptions that are out there.
Definitely.
And it's really important to me that those are changed because, it can help people get diagnosed and it can be really life-changing.
This brings us to the end of the first episode for Dyslexia with Siena. Thank you very much for listening. You can check our other episodes for women in STEM, and we look forward to welcoming you back on the next episode for the discussion around dyslexia. Thank you.